Would you believe that after almost 20 years of Mother 3 for the Game Boy Advance having been out, there's still discoveries for unused content within its files being made? Well, believe it, because I have unfinished business regarding covering stuff I find interesting within the ROM, as well as other tidbits about the game I found from other places. To start off with, in the video Mother 3 Secrets I made 3 years ago, I show how there's this weird inconsistency where Flint's battle sprites have less detail on his face compared to his regular overworld sprites. Since then, I discovered that Boney actually has a similar discrepancy. He looks a bit different to his regular front-facing sprite. With both Flint and Boney having similar discrepancies, it makes you wonder as to if the battle sprites for the characters were actually completed earlier on than some of the other graphics for the game. And then they just forgot to touch up Flint and Boney's later on after they seemingly touched up their overworld sprites. One character I think I didn't mention in any other videos that has bizarre unused graphics is Dr. Andernuts. Specifically, he has these sprites where his face is melting. It might not be that though, it looks like he has something running from his nose instead. Which is strange, but seems like it'd fit Itoi's sense of humour. This seems to be a part of a rather long unused animation for him where he gets zapped, does this weird thing with his face, and then falls to his knees. He also has this unused sprite where he's fallen on his face. I have to wonder what that long animation was meant for though. I guess Andernuts was meant to have a bit more screen time originally. Pre-time skip Lucas and Klaus have graphics for when they'd be at 0 HP that you'd never get to see normally, but you can get to display if you hack your party. That said, they only have these graphics for standing still, so if you try walking around with them like this, Klaus just becomes his regular forward-facing sprite, and Lucas just goes invisible. Technically, a couple of the Lucas ones are used in the cutscene where he gets scolded by Alec, and one more is used after that if you go back to the family house, but the rest go unused. Also worth pointing out that in this clip I recorded to showcase these sprites for the twins, you can likewise see some unused graphics of Sooty Flint at 0 HP that normally you wouldn't be able to see without hacking. Unlike the twins though, his walking graphics are actually fully intact, fascinatingly enough. Also on the topic of these characters, you maybe were aware that the Masked Man has unused talking sprites in all directions. Of course they go unused because when the hell would you expect to see the Masked Man talk? Except, one of these is actually used, the one where he's backwards facing away from the camera. That's actually used here. Just thought that was interesting that they actually used talking graphics for him in the game, even though we aren't shown what he actually says here. I'd also like to point out these unused sprites for Hinawa pointing up while talking. Bizarrely, this is the second unused animation of her pointing up and talking. I bring this up because, obviously with Hinawa, her non-ghost sprites don't have that many chances within the game's narrative to pop up, therefore in theory it should make it easier to narrow down when these could have been used. But I don't know, maybe there were more additional unused cutscenes than just the ones we know about that would have utilized these graphics of hers. I'll get back to Hinawa in a second, but I want to highlight these graphics of Flint and Duster, which I've talked about a few times before in other videos. They're really angry over something, which sadly I can't narrow down what it could be, but the discovery I do want to share actually narrows down what chapter these would have seemingly been used in. On Pigmask Duster's sprite sheet, you'll find these two unused sprites, which when compared to his aforementioned unused angry sprites, that's the same pose and everything. Therefore, these graphics seemingly were meant for Chapter 5, particularly made for before when changes were made to the story and Flint's role in Lucas's party was cut. How interesting. Pigmask Duster having this also implies that whatever event that could happen to get these animations to trigger could happen both before and after everyone puts on their disguises. Ultimately, it seems to me that there had to have been some pretty major story changes to Chapter 5 that we just can't know the full extent to due to a lack of context from the game's files. Maybe one day if dev notes get shared or a prototype of the game surfaces. That all said, with the knowledge that these were meant for Chapter 5 in mind, that means that my old theory can get thrown out that they were meant for Tane Tane in Chapter 7, and additionally, it probably means the unused angry ghost Hinawa probably also wasn't meant for Tane Tane. A while ago, I did make a mock-up of what it could have hypothetically been used for otherwise. I think it's possible that for the final battle with the Masked Man, there'd be overworld interludes rather than just in battle, and maybe this is where Hinawa's ghost would actually be visible. Though, who can really say? Looking at the map table data for outside of Lighter's burning house shows this unused animation for these wood pieces on fire, spinning around, for some reason. It looks so weird if you hack the game to re-enable these objects. I can't say how these would have been used. Another oddity is that you're probably familiar with how in Mother 3, if you're facing a wall or object and press the A or L button, sometimes there'll be flavor text, but in every other instance it'll just say, "No problem here." Well, if you check specifically this fire by this broken tree, you'll get nothing. It's one of the only instances in the whole game where pressing the check button next to something doesn't bring up "no problem here," which in turn suggests that there was text originally assigned here that was deleted from the files. After the fire stops, you'll notice that only the stumps of the burnt trees are left, except for this one specific tree I was just talking about. So all of this is implying this tree probably was meant to be something game mechanic wise you were meant to interact with in earlier builds. And considering in the EB64 equivalent of this scene, it shows Lyda trapped under a tree, I guess this was probably something that was planned to carry over to the GBA version. They got changed around at some point. Something else I found interesting is that there's an early design for the instant revitalizing device that was revised in the final game, and there's also what appears to be early graphics for Tane Tane Islands. Maybe it could be some other island, I guess, but I don't know. You might recall that the first time in the game that you're shown any of the dragon needles is during Chapter 2, where you can see it from a distance in the courtyard of Osoe Castle up from a balcony. Have you ever wondered if they bothered to make graphics for the needle here after it gets pulled? Well, they did actually think to do that, but it goes unused, as you can't actually reach this part of the castle after Chapter 5. Using a walkthrough walls cheat, or otherwise messing with the game's events via hacking will let you see this, as well as an unused line of flavor text pointing out the needle having been pulled. Speaking of unused lines of text, I'd like to talk about lots of lines I've discovered over the past few years. And by discovered, what I mean is lines that aren't documented on TCRF and I otherwise do not see anyone talk about anywhere. Using a similar method to what I described before, you can find that in Chapter 3, Aeolia has a line of dialogue they say if you talk to them as Salsa. The text block data for the campfire scene shows there was originally meant to be a frog here that would misspeak and say, "Wave your game," before then promptly correcting themselves. One very unexpected cut line of dialogue I found was meant for Chapter 7. During that chapter, if Kumatora is present when Duster is rescued, she says, "Geez, is this lucky or unlucky? I can't tell." And Duster responds with, "You're all lucky, that's the only way I can see it." However, looking at the text block data for this scene shows he had a different response that was going to be used originally. He was initially going to respond to Kumatora's line with, "That's my line, Kumatora, baby." Yeah, they cut out a line from Duster where he flirts with Kumatora. How odd. We can speculate all day as to why they cut this, but that's a topic for another day. Also, yes, if you watched Snowwood's April Fool's Earthbound 64 animation from this year and recognize this line, it does actually come from Mother 3's files, it wasn't just made up. Going back to the Chapter 1 forest fire real quick, there's several unused lines found in one of the text blocks for this part, particularly of Thomas or Bronson pointing out the fireflies gathering, Lyda passing out, and also presumably a line that would have been used if you tried to exit this area without progressing forward, where he says, "Flint, fuel's gonna get burned to death. I didn't know you were such a cold-hearted person." I wanted to highlight that line in particular because the bizarre wording of "fuel's gonna get burned to death." Was the original Japanese text worded as awkwardly, or did they just sort of slip up on the fan translation here? I don't know. You may remember also in Chapter 1, you're given the option to bring Boney with you during the search for Hinawa and the twins, but you can actually say no to him, which if you do, you'll get to see this cutscene later where Matt brings Boney to come along with Flint. Most players don't tend to see this because basically everyone always opts to bring Boney with them, but what's interesting is that after Boney joins you this time, there's unused text to show that you're actually going to be given the option a second time to bring Boney along or not, specifically for just after Duster climbs up the cliff, and you're about to follow him up there. Boney's dialogue was to be, "Woof woof, take me with you too. I'm scared, but I'll do my best." The game would then ask you if you want to take Boney with you or not. If you say yes, he would say, "Woof, gotta be careful not to fall." If you say no to him, he'd whimper and say, "Please don't fall." You know, even though Boney wants to come along with you because he is one of the family, I wonder if any players would say no to him simply because they're worried about their dog getting hurt while out in the forest with them, with who knows what lurking around. I wouldn't blame anyone for not wanting to bring Boney if it was for that reason. Also, for the sake of thoroughness, I want to mention that the text block I found this stuff in also has an additional line from Duster that goes unused, where he says, "Let's get a closer look, Flint," for when they notice the pig mask stuff. Looking at the unused text for the game like this reminds me, I appreciate it when fan translations bother to translate all the unused text that a game has. I've seen some fan translations of text-heavy games that just do not bother to fully translate text they know isn't used in the game, so the fact literally every line of text, unused or not, is translated in the Mother 3 fan translation is very nice and appreciated. That said, I want to segue into my next point of discussion, that being about the debug room for Mother 3. Some of the discoveries I made in this video were just from playing around with this game's debug room, and it's pretty fun. I recommend giving it a look if you've beaten the game more than a few times. Anyways, obviously all the text within this room goes unused because you can't access here without hacking. What's kinda odd to me is the way some of the text here was translated. It leaves out some detail that I feel like should have been kept in. Obviously this stuff isn't really important at all in the grand scheme of things, especially since it's the debug room that most players would never see, but I still want to mention this because it's interesting to me. The very last event listed in here is for the last needle, and in Japanese the text mentions Fall of the Pig King, which you should recall is one of the subtitles Mother 3 was going to have originally, before being scrapped. For some reason, the fan translation doesn't retain this in the name of this event. Also, the prologue is referred to as Chapter 0 here, whilst the fan translation doesn't keep this. Which I feel is weird because, you know, most people tend to just call it the prologue, when by technicality, Chapter 0 is the official name for it. Again, not important, but I felt it was worth mentioning. Some of these descriptions are straight up completely different to the ones from the Japanese version, such as for instance, this one in Japanese for Chapter 3 that translates to Disaster for Wes again, in the fan translation is just back to inn. How bizarre. One more inconsequential change the fan translation made that I felt was interesting is that when you first encounter Facade, his name tag is just a bunch of question marks. But in the original Japanese version, he actually has a name written here. It just translates to Mysterious Man, though. Speaking of inconsequential changes, did you know the screenshot on the back of the box is a prototype screenshot? Yeah, not only in this part from Chapter 4 do you never see Mapson on this bench, but also the way the square here was drawn changed by having part of it be shifted by 1 pixel. Really riveting knowledge to have, I know. Something at least a little more interesting is that you might know about that very broken unused forest fire cutscene of Hinawa and the kids trying to escape the burning forest, where a bomb goes off and separates them. Well, it is technically possible to force the game to play it, it's just very broken like I said. I'd really like to see someday though if some hacking genius was able to restore this properly and get it to play as intended. I'm sure it's technically possible, probably. Speaking of unused cutscenes, one that I don't think I've ever mentioned before is that there's one from Chapter 5 where a pig mask tells you how to operate a pork bean. Notably, Boney seems to be missing from the cutscene data for whatever reason. Only your first 3 party members have any data, strangely. Cool to see this either way though, regardless. On the cover to the Mother 3 Complete Guidebook, there's this side-facing sprite of Yadda, where he has a different colour scheme to what you see in the game. Meanwhile, in the Nintendo Dream Guide, there's a front-facing sprite of this Yadda design. What gives? It seems that it's an early design for him, that 2 different guidebooks happen to use 2 different sprites of. As you can see, as opposed to his final design, he's sporting purple a part of his outfit, he has white eyes, and the way his beard is coloured differs. This isn't the only instance of one of the official Mother 3 guidebooks accidentally using unused sprites, as the aforementioned Nintendo Dream Guide uses this battle sprite of the masked man without his helmet. This is the one used in the game, meanwhile this one goes unused. Unlike those lighter sprites though, this masked man battle sprite is still left over in the game's files. Just while I have early graphics that are no longer in Mother 3's files on your mind, I should talk about how interestingly, the New Pork City stage in Super Smash Bros. Brawl actually has early versions of several of the graphics that the area utilizes in Mother 3. Of course, Smash Brawl did come out almost 2 whole years after Mother 3 released, but given that Brawl started development before Mother 3 for GBA was close to being finished, it makes some sense that early graphics for that game made their way into Brawl, at the same time that game was also being developed. I'll go over some notable examples of some differences. There's this completely unused dragon graphic, as well as this used dragon graphic, which is different to the one in GBA Mother 3, being drawn a little differently with some differing shading. This Porky banner has a different balloon. Instead of being a bunch of them, it's a large singular one. And the most notable difference in my opinion is that the little Andernuts' lab has its sign misspelled as Rabo. In Mother 2 and the Japanese version of Mother 3, the building says Labo instead. There's plenty of other differences between these graphics found in Brawl and what's found in Mother 3, but I won't bore you going over every single little difference. That said, one more small thing from Brawl I want to mention is that there's early icons for the characters playable in the Great Maze, as well as bosses present. Porky's icon uses his Mother 3 battle sprite, but you can't really tell very well if it's unchanged from what's present in Mother 3. Overlaying it with the actual sprite makes it look like it's unchanged from his Mother 3 sprite, but who can really tell? One random thing we learnt about the game's development thanks to those Nintendo Gigaleaks is that Mother 3 passed its lot check on the 24th of March 2006, just under a month before the game's release. If you're unfamiliar with the term, a lot check basically means that Nintendo has inspected the game and considered it to be ready to be released as a retail product. Pretty neat. For Mother 3's 18th anniversary last year, the producer for the GBA version, Shinichi Kamioka, posted this image. If it at all looks familiar to you, it may be because it's actually this image that originated publicly from the June 2013 issue of Nintendo Dream, that I have talked about previously, but obviously in much better quality now. Now that we can actually properly see what this image is showcasing, I can give an analysis of it. The lineup of characters seems to be Lucas, Flint, Klaus, and Duster. The twins really do not resemble any of their other designs, but notably this version of Klaus seems to have a similar hair swirl going on that his final GBA design sports. You'll actually take note that these designs here are actually different to the illustrated concept art of the twins from around that time, indicating that they were probably drafting a lot of different redesigns for the characters at this point. Flint has visible eyes, but otherwise really looks nothing like any of his other designs, other than that he's still a cowboy. He sure is something. And finally, with Duster, he has the same hair color and giant nose as his 1996 earliest design for Earthbound 64, which is odd since, as you hopefully know, they did redesign Duster in that afterwards, but then his outfit in this design actually seems to resemble the same one he has in his final GBA design. How interesting. Additionally, in this image, you can see this neat looking inn, and hey, there's a Mr. Saturn rock. What a fascinating look as to what Mother 3 on GBA could have looked like originally. According to Mr. Kamioka, this iteration of the game actually had a fully complete version of Chapter 1. It was presented to Shigesato Itoi in 2003, where he disapproved of the game's visuals, leading the team to rebuild the game with new graphics, essentially reusing Mother 2's art style, with some updates and small changes. While I'm talking about concept stuff, I want to bring up how very recently, a dev for the GBA version of Mother 3, Akiyuki Suzuki, shared on Twitter more of his concept art of some enemies he designed. These newly shared images include art of the Dogfish, the 10 Yeti, the Hefty Head, the Chili Dog, and the Almost Mecha Lion. Notably, the Almost Mecha Lion's final design lacks the giant bottom jaw the art shows it having. It's nice to get more concept art for the game of course, but the way in which we received it kinda sucks. They were posted onto Twitter as fucking grok animated images. Thankfully the first frame of these videos could be taken and shows what the unaltered original artwork looks like, but really, I just want to have an aside for a second and say what a fucked up world we live in, that this is how I have to say we got some new concept art for Mother 3 of all games. But yeah, whatever. I feel like before this video ends, I should cover at least one purely EB64 thing. So here's something I hadn't talked about before anywhere. As you may know, the New Age Retro Hippie from Mother 1 and 2 was actually meant to return in the N64 version of Mother 3, but didn't make it into the GBA version. However, in Earthbound 64, he was to have his name be revealed for the first time. Sorta. What I'm referring to is, in more than one publication covering the game, one of which being the March 1998 issue of 64 Dream, it's mentioned that this guy was going to be called Ramos. This blurb next to him says, "Oh, it's Ramos. This is a Nintendo game, so Ramos from the Kyoto Purple Sanga makes a guest appearance." Or maybe we're reading too deep into it. This guy appears on page 12. He's the carefree guy. The Kyoto Purple Sanga is a soccer team, and a guy called Roy Ramos was a player for the team. Since Nintendo is based in Kyoto of course, they're saying they included a Kyoto soccer player as a reference to that. I'm not sure if his name being Ramos would have been something that would have ended up as a throwaway piece of dialogue in the game, or if this reference was just something meant to be mentioned in this promotional material. Still interesting, regardless. And finally, I wanted to save what I'm sure some people may consider the best thing for last. I feel like when it comes to glitches in the Mother series, the first thing fans tend to think of is the tent glitch from Earthbound, and for understandable reasons. Mother 3 doesn't really have the reputation of having any crazy glitches that can break the game or anything. Except for one, that I'm going to talk about here so more people can learn about this bizarre oversight. As you may recall, on Tane Tane Island, one of the hallucinations of Klaus you encounter can actually join your party, but for only an extremely short time. You walk a few pixels and he starts a battle with you, and then disappears upon being defeated. But what if I told you there was a way to keep this Klaus hallucination in your party and prevent him from disappearing? Oh yeah. This glitch was actually discovered back in 2022 by a user called Pascal Tyranitar, and in this thread he made, you too can perform the glitch with the instructions provided. I recommend looking through the thread yourself if you're curious, but to summarize the instructions, if you lose the fight to this Klaus hallucination and then say yes to continuing on the game over screen, you'll be able to walk past him without an interaction being forced. Then if you save outside Mixolydia's house, run back to where the Klaus hallucination is, and carefully lure this woman hallucination to follow you to near where the Klaus one is, you can get the Klaus hallucination to join, then trigger a fight with the woman hallucination before the Klaus one fights you, then just lose the fight to that woman, pick yes on the game over screen, and you'll respawn with Klaus in your party, and he won't leave you. You brought Klaus back. Honestly, I know hindsight is 20/20, but the criteria to trigger this glitch to occur is so simple that it makes me question how it took so long for this glitch to be discovered, but it also makes me wonder how the game's developers didn't catch this. They could have at least made the Klaus hallucination that joins you just an NPC or something, and not the actual genuine party member Klaus. But thanks to them not doing that, we're free to mess around with Klaus in our party now and see what happens. Post-timeskip Klaus actually has very few sprites made for him that are in the files for one thing, so he lacks things like ladder climbing, pre-running, and running sprites, with the exception of ones for running towards the camera, which are actually used in the curtain call for the game. Cutscenes will just pretend Klaus isn't there, and it makes for some very bizarre looking scenes, with him just standing in place. And of course, you can use him in battle thanks to this glitch. He starts only as strong as he is during the mole cricket fight from the start of the game, but he can actually level up and get bizarrely pretty strong, especially since the game doesn't actually allow you to equip anything with him. What's worth noting is that Klaus's stats as he levels up aren't just copied from another character, he actually has stats unique to him that would otherwise be unused in normal circumstances, but thanks to this glitch, can actually be seen technically without hacking being necessary. But yeah, he has unique stats for some reason. Looking at his stats for when he's level 99, he actually winds up with a higher defense stat than both level 99 Lucas or Flint. This glitch can be performed during chapter 7 of course, but it can only be used during this chapter, as softlocks will occur that can't be bypassed. One occurrence can happen if you haven't pulled Doria's needle yet, where Lucas will just get stuck in place. If you have pulled their needle before performing this glitch though, you'll instead get soft locked on the masked man fight at the end of the chapter, meaning sadly we don't get to bring Klaus into chapter 8. One more thing I'd also like to mention that you probably noticed is that I switched over to using footage of the game from the Nintendo Switch Online port, just to prove that yes, this is all possible on legit hardware. No debug room shenanigans via emulation were used. It also shows that this is something you can perform in the original Japanese version of the game, not just the fan translation. That said, I'd caution anyone interested in performing this glitch, that yes, if you do perform it and then save after Klaus is with you, you won't be able to beat the game due to the soft locks I mentioned before. Otherwise, this is a fascinating glitch and was interesting to mess around with. I recommend checking out that Twitter thread I mentioned before. It has more details about some of the weird stuff that can happen thanks to this glitch. Link is in the description below. And that's it for stuff I want to cover for now, but expect me to talk about more Mother 3 stuff again soon. Or whenever, I guess. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss it. I hope you liked this video, and you know, if you did like this video, be sure to share it with others you know that also like Mother 3. Sharing actually helps a lot and I appreciate it immensely. What was your favourite thing I discussed in this video? Leave a comment and let me know. Be sure to join me next time where I talk about how unplayable this game is because there's a couple of sprites where Duster's mustache changes colours for no reason.